Hello and welcome to the business edition of PM Express. My name is Philip Sanfuri. In the last few days, we've seen a number of developments in the energy and petroleum sector right here in Ghana. First and foremost, we've seen a story developing on a looming debt crisis and possible ramifications for the power consumption we enjoy in this country. We've also seen the reintroduction of the stabilization levy on petroleum products or at the pumps. And on tonight's show, we want to explore all these angles, particularly the issue of the debt in the energy sector. And we keep on coming back to a discussion of debt. Different measures have been introduced to deal with this, yet it seems we come back to this. And we know what the power crisis or power challenges can do to an economy. We saw the effect in 2014 right down to 2016 where we had a crippling energy crisis. Other countries, Zimbabwe, South Africa, have their fair share of energy crisis, and we see what it does to their economies. So we want to explore this and find palpable solutions to the problems. We're tired of the games and the citizens want answers. But first and foremost, let's look at the energy sector. I put together an infographic of how simple it is in Ghana, from generation to transmission to distribution. So wherein lies the problem? Let's take a look at that and continue our discussion. Right, so you've seen the infographic there, generation primarily by VRA and then the independent power producers. They are the main focus of our discussion this evening. Then from generation it moves to transmission, and we have the Ghana Grid Company, GridCo. Then from there it goes to distribution. We had ECG and we have NETCO, that's the Northern Electricity Distribution Company that deals with the upper part of the country. And we have ECG that deals with the lower part of the country. Now, under the concession agreement, we have the Power Distribution Services, PDS. But herein lies the problem. If PDS was brought to ensure that inefficiencies were corrected, how can we still have these issues? We need that explanation, we need that insight, primarily because the ramifications on the economy are dire. To help me do all this is Kojo Poku. He's no stranger to this show and to the multimedia family. He's the CEO of Gasop Oil Limited. He's an energy expert, very well-versed man. And he's going to run us through all these things, give us explanation on these two issues. One, the issue with the independent power producers, and two, the stabilization levy and what it means for us. Kojo, thank you very much for joining us.
And thank you for having me on your show.
Perfect, fantastic. So, simple infographic of how the power supply moves in Ghana. Generation, transmission, distribution. It seems very simple.
Right.
If one person does something, it goes this way and it comes this way.
Right.
PDS came about because they said there were some inefficiencies in our distribution chain, primarily. Right now, we're hearing issues of debt building up again, primarily from a chamber of IPPs, independent power producers, that says there's a debt that's supposed to be settled to them from PDS, ECG, we don't know. Or I'll say, I don't know. The question is, in this concessionaire agreement, what does it state? Because we're hearing one thing where PDS says they don't owe the IPPs. It's rather ECG that's supposed to settle that debt of approximately $700 million, if I'm right. Now the question is, what pertains in such agreements and why do we have this sort of loophole?
Okay, let me take you back a little bit. You see, in the whole week, we've had this conversation from a supposed institution calling itself Chamber of the Industry. We did our checks with most of the IPPs, and that institution, which is the Chamber of Bulk, Independent, whatever.
Independent Power Producers.
Well, they don't represent any of the IPPs in the country. None of the IPPs are their members. How they came up with such an ultimatum to government and all that, for me, I'm at a loss. But look, the truth of the matter is that there's indebtedness. So you can't really say that, oh, he hasn't said something that is not out there. How did the debt come about? And you would want to know that. You have ECG, and we've talked a lot about the indebtedness in the sector when the inefficiencies, or we thought there was a need for private sector participation. So we went through all this concessionaire bids and all that, and PDS, the Manila group from the Philippines, was named as the concessionaire. Now, from the 1st of March, they took over the PDS distribution arm of our industry.
Okay.
Now, this is what it is. You have the generators, which are the independent power producers. Now, in the past, we only had VRA because most of our generation was from the hydro at Akosombo.
Yeah, true.
Going forward, VRA also went into some thermal plants, but the thermal plants were very small compared to what VRA was doing in terms of hydro. Then Asogli came on as the first major thermal plant that came into the country. Then the Senate. Then all the TICO and the TAPCOs and all those companies now came. Now we have about close to 70% of our generation mix coming from IPPs, which is the independent power producers.
Okay.
Now they are the ones that use gas, HFO, which is heavy fuel oil, or light crude oil, LCO, to produce electricity. They have what you call a PPA, a power purchase agreement. The power purchase agreement basically stipulates how much generation they are going to do, and that power purchase agreement is signed between ECG and the IPP. So now, during the concession arrangement, the ECG and PDS concession arrangement is more like a landlord-tenant arrangement. What pertains is that all the assets, including the workers, which are also the assets of ECG, was given to PDS to run for a period of 20 years. In that 20 years, the first 5 years, PDS is to invest 500 million, 100 million a year, which we've been mentioning quite a lot recently. Then, one of the things that did not transfer from ECG to PDS was the PPAs, the power purchase agreement.
Okay.
Most people felt that with the advent of PDS, ECG was being collapsed, but it's not. ECG took on a different role, which is ECG now holds the PPAs. They are the contractual, they have a contractual obligation with the power generators. So every month or every quarter, PDS will tell ECG, I need 2,000 megawatts. Then ECG will give PDS 2,000 megawatts. At the end of the month, PDS pays ECG for the 2,000 megawatts that they've given them.
Okay.
ECG again has been given an export license. So ECG now is out in the West African sub-region talking to various countries how they can now supply them power out of the over 4,000 PPAs that the government now has, which ECG holds. So in terms of payment, if it is ECG that gave the power to PDS, PDS at the end of the month have to now do their accounts, whatever money they've collected for the 2,000 megawatts that ECG gave them, they pay that money back to ECG. Then ECG now pays the money to the IPPs. So if anybody comes up and say that, oh, since PDS took over, PDS have not paid the IPPs, that person does not understand the dynamics of how the value chain works.
So it's totally wrong to assume or to even say that PDS is the one who owes the debt.
Who owes the debt?
There's no way,
they don't
because PDS doesn't deal directly with the IPPs.
No, it's ECG that owes the IPPs. Now, let me now go back into the indebtedness. How, you see, ECG from the 1st of March had a clean slate. All the assets was transferred to PDS minus the liability of ECG. Okay. All the liabilities of ECG was ring-fenced by government and transferred to Ministry of Finance to find money and settle that old debt. So ECG started with a clean slate, so they don't owe anybody. What happened is that in the time when ECG was running, every 2 weeks they can find some money for their IPPs. But now it's a different regime. The PDS has to wait till the end of the month, do their accounting, see how much money that they've collected, then transfer that money to ECG. ECG also has to do their accounting, see who gave them what, and pay that money to the IPPs. So that from March till now, the reason there's been a slow movement of payment to the IPPs is that it's a monthly instead of the bi-weekly payment that was being done. Now it's going to take about 2 months because the money has to go from even 6 weeks, end of the month, 2 weeks before it goes to ECG. ECG is going to take another 2-3 weeks before it goes to the IPP. So you're looking at about 2 months before the IPP gets paid, which some of us have come out and said, look, it's unacceptable because the IPPs need liquidity. So the government, be it ECG and PDS, have to sit down and find a way to make sure that there is some form of liquidity flow to the IPPs before ahead of time.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Is it clear, is it true that the IPPs, through their purchasing power agreements, government is the one supposed to provide them with their fuel, be it heavy fuel oil, be it light crude oil, and then the payments that come to ECG from PDS and from ECG to them have to only be within the capacity charges and the other things? Is that
no? Okay, there are 2 sets of companies. The companies that use gas, they take their gas through the arrangement either through VRA, which VRA supplies them the gas. So what happened was that in the time of the doom, so most of the companies that came in, they were only charging for the energy charge, and then the gas, the fuel component, government will tell you, look, I'll give you the fuel, so give me your cost minus the fuel. So VRA was the one supposed to supply the fuel. So most of the gas companies, the VRA supplies them the gas. So basically they get fuel and the offsetting is done. There are 3 companies, AXA and Car Power, they use HFO, and then Senate use LCO. So the 2 companies that government now buys fuel for, which is not the normal gas through the gas pipeline or from Atuabo, is AXA and Car Power. Now, that arrangement was being handled separately before. But now, from what I know, Ministry of Finance is playing a very central role in the acquisition of fuel for these companies, mainly because we owe them. If they were to go into the market and find fuel, they don't have the money to go and find it. So government not wanting the lights to go off is being proactive in making sure that Ministry of Finance finds money to now buy fuel for these companies. But that procurement of fuel is mainly for AXA and Car Power, not for the other companies. The other companies get their fuel through VRA, which is the gas from either Atuabo or West African Gas Pipeline.
So if there's a non-payment coming from ECG, will this have any effect on power supply?
Yes, because liquidity is very key. Bear in mind, they don't only use fuel, they use manpower. They have to pay their staff. They have to maintain their equipment. So if they don't get paid, look, the companies are working. You owe the money, you pay. What they do use their money for has got nothing to do with you. So you can't really say that, oh, I'm giving you fuel, so why don't you be quiet and sit there? They need the money to pay insurance. They have overhead costs and all those things they need to pay. So liquidity to the IPPs is very, very, very important. And that is why, for some of us, the role that Ministry of Finance have taken upon themselves is a bit tricky, because you realize that now it's not mostly about Ministry of Energy anymore. It's about Ministry of Finance. Because the ring fence debt, the old indebtedness which exists in the sector, is all sits with Ministry of Finance. So Ministry of Finance is now playing more like the god, I should say, and determine who gets what at what time. And that is what the lot of outcry is coming from, because you remember that the ESLA, we cannot accept any money from ESLA because we took a 10-year money.
Yeah, I was coming to that.
Yes, we took 10-year money and paid off the BDC debts and the VRA and all those debts. The little of that money went into the energy sector, which is the power sector, where to offset some of these debts. So there is a huge chunk of money which is still owed out there, which the government acknowledge that if nothing is done about it, it can really cripple this economy. And I know at the Ministry of Energy, a lot is being done to make sure that they get the liquidity and the flexibility to be able to tackle this indebtedness.
So you speak about the bond issue and the 10 billion they were seeking, Ghana cedis. I think they were able to get only 6 out of it in the initial flotation.
Right.
If we've raised that amount, you mentioned that it's used to settle the BDCs and others. Now the question is, some will keep on asking, to the uninformed and the uninitiated, when you hear such things, you feel like, okay, so government is doing something to solve these issues. That's on the bond side. Then there's something we're discussing off where this cash waterfall mechanism. I kept on seeing it, and they keep on saying that the bond together with that are solutions to the current energy situation or the energy situation in the country. And after these two are done, we would no longer have such debt issues again, because the cash waterfall mechanism will come to replace that build-up of debt where it's skewed to one, and when it comes into play, it brings about some equality, if I can call it that, in the generation, transmission, distribution line. What's your assessment on that?
Well, let me take the first one. Let me take the first one first. The bonds. You realize that when ESLA bond was gone for, the energy sector debt was not only power sector debt. It was upstream, downstream, and power. So there was the BDC indebtedness, which was the FS losses and all those that was crippling the banks and all that. And there was a big cry from the banks that the BDC owes so much and blah, blah, blah. The people who have supplied fuel, Sahara, VRA indebtedness, all that. That was a huge, you can see that thing is gone away. Major part of that money that was raised from the ESLA solved the downstream mess. So the monies that were owed to the BDCs and all that was scrapped. That took care of it. It took care of some of VRA's debt to give VRA some liquidity, so VRA got some money. Not so much went into the power. So the IPP's indebtedness, when you come to the energy sector, which is the electricity sector, let me call it the electricity subsector. The electricity subsector, there are certain indebtedness. The MDA's indebtedness, which is the ministries, departments, and agencies, and the state-owned enterprises not paying their electricity bills. So that has accrued a debt which sits there. Then you have subsidies, okay? Subsidies which government is supposed to, all the lifeline customers which government subsidizes. That one too, government is supposed to find money and pay that. So that also sits there. Then you have the existing debt of under recovery, which is basically IPPs not being paid and the money going on and on and on. So you have those coming up together and summing up into one huge amount which sits there and looking at everybody. So the bond, though it did some, couldn't do all. And because the inflows into the ESLA account is not so much, because of the dwindling CD to the dollar ratio, they can't go back to the market to borrow again. So now they have, Ministry of Finance has to find other ways of raising money to take care of this indebtedness. That's one. Then you look at the cash, the water flow mechanism. It was supposed to be implemented and supervised by PULC.
Okay.
The idea was that, look, let's have one basket. All electricity tariffs, all electricity revenue collected goes into a basket. In that basket, PULC will pay the distribution service charge to ECG, be it PDS or ECG. They will pay them the distribution service charge. Then the transmission cost will go to Gridco. Then the IPPs will be paid their money. So in that case, ECG or PDS doesn't use the IPP's money for something else and say they don't have money. So everybody will be paid from that basket. But when PDS came in, PDS thought that, look, we are not comfortable with that structure. What we would do is that PDS now prepares to now put up a bond to say that, look, if I am taking 2,500 megawatts of electricity from you a month, I am posting a bond that every month I will pay you back that money. So whatever you give me, I will post a bond to pay you back. So that is the arrangement that the government agreed for the concession going forward. So the arrangement on the ground now is that we're no longer going to use the waterfall mechanism, but PDS is going to post a bond, and every electricity given to them, they guarantee to pay for that electricity, so that ECG now sort out the IPPs.
So given this mechanism PDS wants to adopt, that's on the downside, let me say on the downstream side, let me put it that way. It seems on the surface of it that it might solve problems in that space. Considering the mid and upstream, what do you think needs to be put in place there, not to bring us back to a debt issue?
You see, it's a good thing that PDS guarantees. Bear in mind, as we speak, we have about between 21 to 23% of technical and commercial losses. So the technical loss, commercial losses come to 21% to 24, 25%. What it means, let's take the 21%. What it means is that every 100 cedis worth of electricity you put in the grid, 21 cedis is lost to commercial and technical. So the only most recoverable is 79 cedis. That is worrying. So if PDS is saying that, look, give me 100 cities, I'll guarantee to pay you back 100 cities. It means that they are prepared to work to resolve the technical and commercial losses and still guarantee that they pay you back full value of what you gave them. That is why we feel that PDS with that will be able to go into the market and be very aggressive in collecting the monies that you owe and also correct the technical losses, because if they are given 1,000 megawatts and 21% of that 1,000 megawatts is lost, they are guaranteeing that they will pay back. The only problem would be under recovery, which is the exercise that was done recently by PURC, saying that, look, in 2017, an exercise was done. We looked at it. The FX went off balance. We feel that we need to readjust the pricing. They now came up with 11.17%, which now brings us to realistic prices in terms of tariffs. So now, if PDS is able to pay whenever they take 1,000 megawatts and they pay for that 1,000 megawatts, ECG would have no excuse but to be able to pay the IPPs for the power that they've produced. The only challenge is that there are capacity charges for non-usage. You know, we've signed a lot of PPAs, and those PPAs are take or pay. So let's say we have 4,000 megawatts of power sitting with ECG. We've only utilized 2,500 of them. We're only paying as in generation of revenue for 2,500. The 1,500, government has to find money and pay that take or pay the capacity charge for the IPPs. That is where there is conversation that, look, let's review some of these IPPs contracts and stuff like that.
Good one there. My colleague Ebenezer Sabute spoke to Ben Boachi, Executive Director of Africa Center for Energy Policy, and on some of these issues. Let's take a listen to what he had to say with his discussion with my colleague Ebenezer Sabute.
Our expertise, not necessarily finance, because you want to shield the financial commitments of the country, but you may need expert opinion to understand what decisions are being taken. And that is also critical to ensure that the decision is not from the person who is contracting on behalf of the state. For example, if the Ministry of Energy is contracting on behalf of the state and the Finance Ministry want to audit or ensure that that is a prudent decision, who is giving a technical advice, to the Finance Ministry for them to be able to take that decision? And I think that is where internal expertise becomes relevant for them to understand the technicalities with those decisions before they can endorse it. Otherwise, you either end up unnecessarily delaying decisions because you don't understand it, or endorsing a bad decision altogether.
We are likely to come back to the power issues again, the energy sector. IPPs are raising concerns and all that. Is that a heavy blow to the economy?
No, I mean, the power sector challenges are known. We know that we have financial challenges, which there has been attempts to resolve through the distribution sector with the coming on of PDS. But that is still not enough. They need to be robust about how we think through the entire value chain and ensure that all the loose ends are tightened, from procurement of fuel all the way to the pricing of the output or the power. It's more efficient and robust to reduce inefficiencies and costs. And that is the only way the sector can be transformed to be what it needs to be. So there is a lot of thinking that ought to go into it, bringing the agencies together to crack the challenges that we have to be able to solve it. Because as of now, it remains the number one worry, on the table for Ghana to be able to navigate, because you're paying so much, excess capacity could hit $42 million a month. What that means is that you are paying money that could have gone into schools, into hospitals, and into other developmental projects. But we're paying it to foreign companies for delivering nothing to us because we don't need the power. We have excess capacity. But how do we deal with that? We may have to buy the bullets. Some of them, we don't need them. We just tell them to go and pay the penalties that are required, if that will save us money. And from the estimate that we have done, it shows that some of them can go, and we may pay about $200 million, but that is better than paying $1 billion or more in 5 or 4 years' time. So those are the hard decisions that ought to be taken now to save the energy.
So let them go, those who are not necessarily...
Absolutely. I mean, there are some of them that have to go and then pay the necessary compensations, to save the country from recurrent debt. Else we are not going to solve the energy sector problems.
Wache, he's Executive Director of the African Center for Energy Policy, in interaction there with my colleague Ebenezer Sabate. And he's essentially saying that we should get rid of some of the independent power producers, save ourselves some money, and all may be well and good in the energy sector. Mr. Poku, so I would just go straight off the bat and ask you, should we get rid of some of these IPPs, and will that be a pathway to an energy sector or a power sector that is rid of this recurring debt issue?
Look, it's a catch-22 situation. You have a short-term problem. How do you resolve it? Two ways you can resolve the short-term problem: by making sure that some of the short-term problem is basically carried forward into your medium to long term, so it gives you a bit of room, flexibility in the short term. If you do not have money, and I mean, my brother Ben makes a very good point that, look, in the long term, there are some companies that we're going to end up paying them maybe 1 billion. But now, if you let them go, you're going to pay penalty. And that penalty, you can pay it now, so your net present value of that cost in the long term is better. Because basically they go off your books and you don't have to accumulate that long term. But the Ghana situation that we find ourselves in is that at present time, we don't have money. We owe these IPPs that we can't even afford to find money to pay their bills. So if Ministry of Finance, and he mentioned earlier that, look, at the Ministry of Finance, they are creating some problems there. You have ministers at the Ministry of Finance trying to take over the Energy Ministry and make decisions that, for me, I think they should leave it for the Ministry of Energy to make. Ministry of Finance are there to work out the financing. If they need technical expertise, they should let the Ministry of Finance people, Ministry of Energy, give them the technical expertise, but they should not stray into the areas where now you have certain times where you have cabinet decisions where Ministry of Finance is holding it back because they are playing finance with it. My point is this: if you have the money, then what Ben's saying makes sense. You have $300 million, you've paid all the indebtedness to the power sector, and you feel that, look, how do I move forward? Let me now let some of them go, find money, pay them $200 million to terminate their agreement. Then in the long term, I save myself $800 million maybe over 4 or 5 years. But if you don't have the money, and you have to now do local BBO, then you now have to do baby steps by managing it as it is, because if you ask that guy to go now, you have to pay him $200 million, but you don't have it. Already you owe him maybe $120 million that you can't pay. So how are you going to now tell him to go and give him $200 million? But like I said, it's a catch-22. If as a country we think we have the money, let's first pay the indebtedness to the IPPs. After we've done that, then we can now look at the option of, okay, who can we let go? We have some excess money. Look, I think I can terminate you. In the long term, the benefit is to us. Some of us, myself and Ben, can look at that, and a lot of the energy analysts in the system, and we can back some of those initiatives. But for me, if somebody comes to me now and saying, look, I'm letting company A go, I'm going to raise $200 million and pay him. Meanwhile, you owe companies $150 million that you've not paid. How does that make sense? So for me, it's a holistic picture. If Ministry of Finance, like I said, ministers in the Ministry of Finance trying to play the energy game should understand that if they want us to back that decision, we need to understand that, look, the IPPs who are there, who will not turn this country into doomsday, have been paid. Then you can go and say that, look, okay, to go forward, I'm going to let company A go because I have excess money to make sure that my long-term gain, I can take care of it now so that I don't have to pay more money.
Our situation is a bit dire. I sit and I'm wondering how whoever's in charge of running this, the balancing act you have to put in place to ensure that, because to the ordinary man and woman, the technicalities will be lost on them. All they want is simply to enter their room, put the light on, and have their energy and have their power and do that. Speaking of energy and power, I want us to move on to the next part of our discussion, the stabilization levy. But before we do that, my colleague George Rafe spoke to the Deputy Minister for Energy, Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam, and they were sharing some insights on why they want to introduce again this stabilization levy at the pumps. Let's take a listen to that.
The reason for introducing the price stabilization and recovery levy was to ensure that domestic prices of petroleum products are stable relative to market forces, because international factors could trigger an increase that may be too much for people to afford. and therefore the levy, once collected and accumulated, is meant to be applied to somehow stabilize the prices. And therefore, we have been applying it for some time now. But the application takes different forms. Either you accumulate it in the fund and then use the fund to stabilize when the need arises, or as we have done in the past, we don't charge it. Okay, but it had to be restored for two reasons. The Ministry of Finance thinks that because it is a levy, when you don't charge, then you are taking a decision which requires parliamentary approval. And therefore, we needed to restore it. And if we will have to withdraw it, we need to come to Parliament for Parliament to consider that decision. And secondly, we have had to restore it because prices generally have been stable. And I can tell you that when we even restored it, prices on the domestic market were flat. In fact, in this current window, the window of 1st July to 15th, 16th July, prices have fallen. Petrol has reduced by about 2.1%, you know, and the trend is the same for other products. And so if the essence of the stabilization levy is to stabilize prices, and prices have been stable, the levy is collected not just for price stabilization, it is also for purposes of price recovery. That is subsidizing premixed fuel and fuel oil. And to the extent that because we're not charging, the fund was depleted, you then had no sufficient balance in the accounts, in the fund, to play the other rules the levy is meant to play, which is subsidizing premixed fuel and then fuel oil.
Right, so that was the Deputy Minister for Energy, Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam, in interaction with my colleague George Rafe on why government has decided to reintroduce the stabilization levy, and he advances some arguments from them. My guest is going to tell us whether he finds these arguments tenable or untenable.
Well, let me correct that. It's not been reintroduced. You see, what happens is that the stabilization levy is by act of parliament,
okay,
and it's in there. You can't take it out, and anytime you want to introduce, go back to parliament to bring it in. What MPA does is that when prices are going up, they make it zero. So in the price build-up for petrol, diesel, and LPG, when the prices are high, they will now zero the stabilization levy, so that it now cushions me and you for the prices. Normally, it's 10 pesos for, I think, LPG and petrol, and 12 pesos for diesel, something like that. So normally, when prices are coming down, like the way it is now, they will now bring it back up again, from 0 to maybe 10 pesos or 12 pesos. What it does, I'll give you an example. In the last 2 weeks, the stabilization levy was made from 0 to 12 pesos, but we saw a further reduction at the pump. So what it means is that if the stabilization levy was still 0, price at the pump now will be much lower than it is. But it still fell from the high of the 525 and that about. Right now, there are even some places where you see 495 and 490. So though the stabilization levy was brought back into the price build-up, prices now still fell at the pumps because the world market prices is lower now than it was a couple of months ago, and because the cedi also has been able to stabilize a bit against the dollar, you're able to now play a bit with it. That's really it. But I mean, I think we can now have a further discussion on how consumers can also play a role in affecting the prices of the pumps. Because you see, when the deregulation came about, the deregulation was meant for us, me and you, the customer, to be able to now drive what the price of the pump is. We're not doing such a good job at it. We have the consumer power. And in the market of demand and supply, where we, the consumers, now will be the determinant of where we go to buy our fuel, I clearly see on some streets, and I don't want to mention any companies' names, but in West Legon area, you find some fuel stations that are dead cheaper than almost every station in the area. Meanwhile, the taxi driver who's complaining about fuel prices will drive past this fuel station who is very cheaper and probably 20 pesos cheaper and go to another company which is maybe 30 pesos or more than where he's just driven by. What you are doing is that you are not helping the deregularization. What we are supposed to do as customers is to patronize the cheaper fuel stations. So you look at the board before you enter the forecourt, you look at how much they've signed up there to make sure that it's that price. Then go to the pump. Don't only look at what is at the signage. At the pump, also look to make sure that what they put at the signage is what they're actually pumping for you. Because they could also have a situation whereby they will advertise cheaper at the signage, and when you come in, it's not the same. But if we are able to patronize cheaper filling stations, then they would give the incentive to reduce it further. So then with the pricing war, who benefits? Me and you, and the price can come further down.
We'll come back to that. My guest, Kwadwo Poku, he's an energy expert and CEO of Gas Oil Limited. My name is Philip Namfuri. We're taking a quick break. We'll be right back. Thanks for staying with us. This is the business edition of PM Express. My name is Philip Namfuri, and my guest, Kwadwo Poku, he is the CEO of Gas Oil Limited, and he's an energy expert. And just before we went on the break, he was telling us about how we consumers can push for more competition in the OMCs, as the oil marketing companies, and ensure that where prices are lower, we troop there and it forces other players to drop the price down. But all things being equal, I, for one, have this mindset that where fuel prices are cheaper, there's dirty fuel there, and he wants to speak to that.
Okay, now you see, it probably dates back to the Gao era, where you have the time when we used to buy fuel from that. So
I'm not sure I was born by that time.
So when you used to buy fuel from, when you now go, the man will do this, and then he'll do cat, and then it comes out. So those are the times when people feel that when prices are cheaper, the Gao it's dirty fuel, but it's not. Look, all OMCs and all BDCs uses the same tanks. Okay, Cyrus and Puma have their tanks, Bost have their tanks, and most companies use the Tema or your refinery tanks. So if you are buying from company A or company B, whether Guel or Shell or any other company, they are all buying from these importers. So they are all drawing from the same tank. So it doesn't mean that if company A is cheaper than Shell, or Shell is cheaper than Guel, or Guel is cheaper than Nasona or Allied, it's dirty fuel, because they are all buying from the same. What happens is that when the fuel is delivered, maybe, and now MPA is very strict and they're putting monitoring and all that, people would take the fuel and siphon some along the way and mix other stuff with it and deliver it to the tank. Or in some instances, when the tank is dumped at the station, they basically mix certain things. That is where the contamination fuel comes in and stuff like that. But in general, you know, there's a lot of monitoring now by MPA, Standard Authority and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So that days of people tampering with the quality of fuel is really gone. Every now and then you might get a very one-off scenario, but when a fuel station is displaying cheaper fuel, it doesn't mean it's dirty fuel. It's good fuel. All they are trying to do is take advantage of the deregularization to get you, the taxi driver or the trotro driver or the MD or yourself or myself, to come patronize their station so that they will drive the volume. It's a volume game. The more volume they drive, the more money they make, so that they can now also serve you and I better.
But Mr. Poku, how do we deal with the sentimental attachment to filling stations? There are some people who are stuck in the ways. I sit in people's vehicles, and if there's no Shell in the area, they can drive on an E to get to a Shell. Yes. There are others who are stuck with Goil, others who are stuck with Allied, others who just float anywhere and don't mind. How do we
need to, that is where the deregulation came in. We need to move away from that. Because for me, I just think that, look, I don't want to bash any company on your program, but I think some companies really, their prices are expensive for nothing. You know, like I said, anybody who wants to go on the Westland can go on Westland and see a couple of stations there. Their fuel is dead cheap. I drive all the way from where I live to go to Westland and buy fuel from there because it's the cheapest around. So we should really try. Look, you're a trotro driver, you're a taxi driver, or you are a civil servant, always complaining that fuel prices are high. But then there are companies that are trying very hard to catch your eye with 10 pesos, 20 pesos. If you have 20 pesos lower, you fill your tank. You know how much that is going to save you.
Yeah.
So every little counts. All these politicians trying to make us feel that, oh, fuel price are high. Look, it's 10, 20 pesos, 30 pesos that they are all playing with. So if the competition is allowing the private man to reduce 10, 20 pesos, we should really, as customers, patronize these filling stations and make sure that that price war gets us better fuel.
Okay. I want us to move on to the final part as we draw down on our discussion. An issue that's been coming up, and I know you're very passionate about it, and I want you to educate us on it and its possible ramifications. The car power ship movement, what can we learn from it, and what should we be wary of and be cognizant of? Well,
we know that the car power ship is in Tema. It's going to move to Takoradi, and whilst it moves to Takoradi, it will now convert from HFO to gas. You know, in Ghana, we have a scenario where we have a lot of gas that we are not off-taking. So if we don't off-take these gas, not only are we paying capacity charges to plants we are not using, we are also paying ENI and these companies for gas that we are not using. So we are not utilizing the gas we are paying. We are not putting on the electricity we are paying. So we are in a bit of a pickle. What needs to happen is that car power is moving this month, most likely latest by August, it will move to Takoradi. In the time when it's moving, we might have a little flicker of our lights because a bigger 450 megawatts is moving. So government, I know, is doing all the right preparations to make sure that in the movement of car power from Takoradi to Tema, from Tema to Takoradi, the lights will stay on because they are going to acquire a lot of fuel for all the other plants to be able to generate. When it gets to Takoradi, it's going to use gas. That will bring us some savings. But for me, the most important part is that we need to be wary. And I've always told the politicians that, look, come and tell Ghanaians ahead of time when some of these things are going to happen. Remember when we had the reverse flow tie-in?
Yes.
And we are having lights off and stuff like that. People are really beginning to get tired of when you tell them that there's no doomsaw, but their light still goes off. Yeah. And every time somebody called me and said, Mr. Poku, are you sure that when these PDS people are telling us that they are doing maintenance here, it's not a way of doomsaw timetable? I said, no, it's really they have to do this maintenance. But Ghanaians like to know that, look, like you said earlier, all I care about is go home, switch off my light, and the light comes on. They don't want to hear about all the complications and all that goes on. For me, if that complication of lights going to go off is going to arise as a movement of the car power plant from Tema to Takoradi, the ministry should come out ahead of time to inform Ghanaians that, look, we are going to do this exercise, and as this exercise is going to last for maybe 3 weeks or 2 weeks, we're going to have some light here and there going up. I hope it doesn't happen, but I think Ghanaians are beginning to really lose that confidence in us having a situation where our lights just stay on and don't go off. And some of us are in the industry to make sure that we put pressure on the powers that be to achieve that. For now, my beef is with Ministry of Finance. They need to do more to resolve some of these indebtedness going forward and make sure that the light stays on.
Final two questions. First one is all well and good for the power sector, particularly the one that interfaces with the consumers. Will you say in the coming weeks, days, months, we won't experience any funny problems, barring any unforeseen circumstances?
No, you see, we are on solid grounds, really and truly. We know we talk about a lot of installed capacity, and people don't really seem to understand that installed capacity. In the past, we didn't have the machinery in the country. Now we have the machinery in the country. Look, we have SEM Power coming on. We have a lot of projects that are going to come on probably end of the year. So as we speak now, if money is made available to buy fuel, we probably wouldn't see any light flicker for a very long time. But it is that fuel problem which is basically bothering us a little bit. I'm praying that that is resolved in the coming month.
And then final one, name of the fuel station that that's you buy from. Anyway, this has been the business edition of PM Express.
I don't want to give free advertising to a company. All I said is go on the Westland.
I'll do that. This has been the business edition of PM Express. My name is Philip Namfuru and my guest, Kojo Poku, CEO, Gas Oil Limited and an energy expert. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I did too, and you learned something new. Have a good evening.